Okay. Thanks. Yes, no, it's entirely reflected glory. I can't claim any credit for the occupation at King's, but I think it's really terrific, and I'm very happy to... No, speaking seriously, I think these occupations are absolutely fantastic. Through bad luck, just before this meeting, I had to go to a meeting where I was on the same panel as a guy called Wes Streeting, who's the president, yes, known to some of you, who's the president of the National Union of Students, and this, you know, kind of creepy little bureaucrat, really. To compare him to what students have been doing in the different occupations, really re-establishing a genuine radical student movement in Britain, it's just chalk and cheese, and I think what the students have done has been fantastic. But more broadly, I think what we've seen since Christmas is two things. First of all, Israel, yet again, perpetrating a series of war crimes against the Palestinian people with the assault on Gaza. At one level, not a huge surprise, the state of Israel, for reasons that I'm going to try to explain, is a living, permanent war crime. That's the reality. But secondly, the assault on the people of Gaza didn't break them. It's very important to understand this. Hamas was not destroyed by the assault, nor was the will and determination to fight of the Palestinians. But more broadly, it evoked globally, and particularly in this country, a level of solidarity for the Palestinians which is unprecedented. And it's a really important dimension of the thing. I mean, on Saturday morning I was half asleep listening to the Today programme, and there was this guy on there with a Scottish accent who was laying into the BBC and saying how awful it was that they weren't supporting the appeal for Gaza, and this was outrageous and people were suffering in Gaza. And at the end of the interviewer said, "Thank you very much, Douglas Alexander." In other words, a new Labour Secretary of State, a real kind of new Labour creep, is attacking the BBC for its failure to essentially to support the Palestinians, for its running scared of the Israel lobby, because that's really what it's been all about. If the government feels obliged to do that, that's a reflection of a sea change in public opinion. And one can discuss the various reasons for it. I think it's got a lot to do with the cumulative effect of the anti-war movement in this country over the past few years, and particularly the work of the Stop the War Coalition. I think it's made an enormous difference in getting into people's heads a perception of the real problems in the Middle East, and of the way in which the so-called Israel-Palestine problem is central to the structural crisis in the Middle East. But nevertheless, I think it is a very profound change. I mean, I'm a veteran of the movement against apartheid in South Africa. I think we're now at the stage where we can talk seriously about building that kind of solidarity for the Palestinians. In the past we said, oh, we want a movement like the movement against apartheid in South Africa, but to be honest, certainly in this country, we've never got close to it. I think we're now in a different situation. And this is a very important defeat for the Israelis, because they said, you know, that as I think Simon was saying, they said we've got a Facebook page, and you know, they had all these kind of manipulative tactics and spin doctoring and so on, not helped by the fact that spin doctors spoke with Australian or American accents, which, you know, rather reminded you about the law of return, which means that anyone who can meet the definition of the religious definition of a Jew can go and live in Israel and be a citizen of Israel, but Palestinians who were born and raised there for generations can't. But that whole spin machine failed. It's not simply failed, it's actually been counterproductive because of the scale of the movement that's developed. And I think that one of the things that we have to be looking at is at ways of sustaining that solidarity in a long-term basis, beginning, for example, to turn the boycott of Israel from a slogan into a reality. But I think we need to do more than this. The great Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza said, neither weep nor laugh, but understand. And if we really want to see the liberation of Palestine, then we have to try and understand the causes of the Palestinian suffering, and we have to do that as a way of trying to identify how that suffering can be brought to an end. What kind of forces are going finally to break the oppression of the the Palestinians. And here I want to talk about settler colonialism, and I apologise, people who've been in some of the occupations have heard a bit of what I've said, but nevertheless it's an important point. It's very important that when we talk about Israel, we don't start by talking about the Holocaust, because that's not what Israel is about.
Yep.
Israel is about imperialism and colonialism. Yep. That's the context in which it has to be understood, not the kind of justification that apologists for Zionism use by talking about the Holocaust. And what the State of Israel represents, what the Zionist settlement in Palestine represents, is a particular form of settler colonialism. So what is settler colonialism? Settler colonialism is when you conquer and seize other people's land. When I say you, usually European states, and you don't just send a few civil servants and businessmen to control and exploit the population, you send a section of your own population, of all social classes, to go and live in that country. Now there's an issue about settler colonialism, which is one of the key issues, is what you do with the population you've conquered. Now there's the American way, which is to exterminate them. That's what the United States was founded on. The seizure of the Native Americans' land, and effectively the extermination of the Native American peoples. You know, simple solution. Utterly barbaric, but it solves the problem. The alternative solution, which one might call the South African solution, is to seize people's land, but then to exploit the people whose land you've stolen. Now that's obviously a really good formula because it means you don't have to do any work. You can live off the labour of the people whose land you've stolen. The problem with that solution is precisely that you're living off the labour of the people whose land you've stolen. And over time, they're going to try and do something about it. And when they rise up, when they organise, that's the end of settler colonialism. That was the end of settler colonialism in Algeria, in Zimbabwe, and in South Africa. Now, Israel represents a specific form of settler colonialism in which they seized the Palestinians' land. They drove the Palestinians out. They didn't try and exploit the Palestinians' labour. Part of the whole ideological drive of Zionism is not to rely on Arab labour, but to create a total Jewish society in which the work is done by Jews who are exploited by Jewish capitalists. So they didn't want the Palestinians' labour, so they drove them out. They couldn't exterminate them. It was just impossible for reasons that there's no point in going into now. And that creates the situation that we have today, in which you have the coexistence of the dispossessors and the dispossessed, living to a large extent cheek by jowl. A Palestinian minority within Israel itself, and the Palestinians in the occupied territories. And an appalling situation for the Palestinians because they've lost what they had. They're reduced, particularly in Gaza, to absolutely wretched conditions. They coexist with the Israelis, so they're in a permanent and entirely justified situation of grievance and resistance to their condition, which in turn means that Israel exists in a constant state of war against the Palestinians. You see, people say, if only the Israelis and the Palestinians have come to understand each other and understand each other's cultures and histories, then the problem would be solved. That's a mistake. It's a mistake to see it in this terms. This is a structural conflict based upon the dispossession of the Palestinians. Because the State of Israel is based on the dispossession of the Palestinians, and because the Palestinians are still there, we have a situation of permanent war. And as long as the Palestinians exist, the State of Israel will have to attack them, because they're a threat to its very existence as a state. So it's not just a matter of the kind of absolutely rotten people, rotten, foul people who run the State of Israel. They're not the problem. They are there at the top of the State of Israel because you need bullies and liars and murderers to run a state that is permanently at war with the people whose land they stole. And that's why